Hey guys, welcome back. In this video we are going to take the top off of your trunk and we are going to clean the inside out. And what we're going to need to do first is, if you can see this latch right here, there's already one of the nails missing out of it right here. But what I want to show you is, you see this piece of metal that runs along the edge of the trunk right here? This is called dust banding, and what there is it appears that there's two nails that go through the hinge and into the dust banding. Okay, well these aren't really nails. If you were to open up your trunk and look at the inside, you'll see that they're actually rivets. And what we don't want to do is mess with these at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to take off the bottom portion of the hinge, and we're just going to leave the top half attached. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this nail, and this nail out. What you're going to need is a tack puller and one of these, I call them end nippers. What you want to do is get this tack puller underneath the nail, take your hammer, wedge it underneath, and slowly just try and work it out. Okay, now you can see I've got the nail already pulled halfway out. I'm going to take these, get a good tight grip on them, and just try and work it out nice and slow, because you don't want to rip out the wood underneath it. Now if you can see this nail I just pulled out, it's bent over. What they do, whenever they made the trunk, they drove the nails through, but whenever they were driving it through, they kept a steel block on the inside. So whenever the nail came through, it bent it over, and that's what keeps everything so tight, because they didn't have screws back then. So we got one nail out. That one's out. It snapped off in there, not a problem. And this one's been a little stubborn. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try and work it out with these again. And I can feel that there's a lot of resistance on the nail, so I don't think I'm going to be able to take it out this way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these nails, they're very soft steel. That's why they bend over so easily. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and try and snap the head of the nail off. There it goes. That's pretty tough to do. So we got one more under here. You be careful when you're working around these slats. Some of them are really dry and brittle, and they'll crack easily. Other ones are okay. These ones seem like they're in pretty good shape. So you just want to, like I said, work that nail out nice and easy, and there it is. The nice things about these is that they're rounded like this, so whenever you put them on there, you're not going to damage the surface or scratch anything. Okay, now that latch is nice and free, and you can see here's the end of that nail that we cut off. What we're going to do is just, there, it actually fell out on the inside. So take the portion that's sticking out, just hit it, and pound it through, and it'll fall right out on the inside. The other thing, the reason I use this tiny little hammer is just so I can't hit things as hard as I would with a full-size hammer, so I recommend using a little hammer like this. Sometimes, you know, some of these trunks are very delicate, and you don't want to do more damage than what has to be done. Okay, after you get your nails out of the hinges in the back, you'll be able to just take the lid right off. Now, one thing that I forgot to tell you, on the inside of the trunk is a what is called a lid stay. And that is this little deal here that holds the lid open. Remember to take one of the nails off out of the lid stay first before you take the hinges off. It makes it a lot easier. This one, it was already pulled out. It was broken some years ago. So make sure you do that. Okay, now that we've got the lid off, we're going to move on to the inside of the trunk. As you can see, it's got paper on the inside. 99% of your trunks out there are going to have paper. It's usually pretty thin. Sometimes underneath it they'll lay strips of what's like poster board in between the seams where the boards meet, just to make it a little bit smoother, and that can be a little bit tougher to get off. The glue that they used is an organic glue. It's called wheat paste. Very similar to like what you would use for paper mache stuff, like making piñatas and whatnot today. The thing about it is that since it is an organic product, bugs and insects like to eat it, so usually the paper's pretty bad as far as condition goes. So most of the time I just remove all of it and then I will reline the trunk in fabric. And what we're going to need to do is, you can see here that there is a support on either side for the tray that sits in the trunk. We're going to take those off, and we're going to take the lid stay off also. If you leave them in, it's just something else to work around, and a lot of times these are damaged and whatnot, and you'll just want to replace them. If you do need to replace them, just go to Lowe's or Home Depot, and if you look in the finished wood section, like where the molding is and whatnot, they'll have square dowels that are already cut. You can get like, these ones look like they're about 3/4 by 3/4. So we'll move on to the inside and we'll take these off, take the lid stay off, and then we'll start removing the paper. Okay, in order to remove the tray supports, we're just going to take our tack puller, see if we can get it wedged underneath in between the trunk and the support, and we're just going to work it out very carefully, going from one end to another. I can see here that somebody's put, actually those are all modern nails, so they were replaced at some point. And we got a nail sticking out here. Just going to pound that through. And just going to take a pair of vice grips, pull that nail out, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Try to stay out of your way so you can see what I'm doing. Like I said, just start right here on one side. Just gently work your way up. And that one popped right out too. Got a couple nails. Be careful whenever you're working on these trunks. There's a lot of sharp corners and nails and tacks that stick out, so you probably want to wear a pair of gloves, which I should be doing. Okay, now that we got the supports off, we'll just see if we can't pop this lid stay off. And it came right off. Okay, now that we got all of that stuff, we'll move on to removing the paper on the inside. Okay, for taking the paper off on the inside, you're going to need a spray bottle with about 75% water, 25% white vinegar in it. The vinegar helps soften up the glue a little bit, and it also kind of takes the smell out of the trunk. Vinegar is a natural deodorizer. It'll help kill off any microbes or anything living in the trunk. Next thing is a scraper. If you go on my website, I have a list of tools on there that the same tools I use that are pretty good quality stuff that work well for trunks. Anyways, a good quality scraper. This one has a fine blade on it and a rough blade on it. The rough blade seems to work a little bit better. And the other thing is just a utility knife. What we're going to want to do is we're going to take our water and vinegar solution and we're just going to spray down the inside of the trunk lightly. You don't ever want to soak the trunk with water because the wood's so dry from the past 100 years that it'll start warping, it'll want to bend, twist, and you're going to end up with all kinds of problems. So go ahead and just lightly spray down the inside of your trunk. And I don't mean you can't use any water on it, get it good and wet, but just, you know, don't go overboard on it. And I'm sure probably the inside of your trunk smells horrible, and that smell will eventually all be gone by the time we're done with it. What I do a lot of times is, just to get rid of the smell, is to leave the trunk sit outside open with direct sunlight on it for 3 to 5 days. That'll usually kill off most of the odors in it. Another thing you want to be careful of is any kind of mold inside of it, you know. If there is, this one's pretty clean. But if there is, you know, wear gloves, let it sit outside in the sunlight for a while before you work on it. Okay, at this point I have sprayed down the trunk, the inside, and I've let it sit for about 15 minutes or so. And that allows that glue to soften up, the paper to start deteriorating and get soaked through good. Okay, hopefully you guys can see okay. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my scraper and I'm just going to start scraping all that paper out. And work your way around the metal parts that are overlapped on the top. As you can see, this isn't anything difficult, it just takes a little bit of work to get it out. It's going to be important too that you get all of the paper residue out of here, every single bit of it. And the reason for that is, well, one, you're either going to want to finish the wood on the inside, so you're going to have to get all the paper off regardless, or number two, you're going to reline the trunk with paper or fabric at some point when you're finished. And if there's any residual paper inside the trunk, you're not going to get a good bond in between your new fabric or glue, and the paper's going to want to fall off. So, I mean, this is about it. Removing the paper on the inside, it's pretty easy. It just takes a while to do. And, you know, as you go through, you want to keep the paper wet. If you notice that it's starting to dry out, just mist it down again, just to keep that paper good and moist. And that's about all there is to taking the paper out of the inside of the trunk. As you can see now, I've gotten all the paper cleaned out of the trunk and all the adhesives off from the inside, and it's fairly clean. There's a few spots, there's a little bit of residue left that I couldn't get off with the scraper. Basically what we're going to do now is we're going to let the trunk dry out really well. And whenever it's completely dry, we'll start sanding the inside of the trunk. Okay, I've let the trunk dry out for about 12 hours overnight. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start working on the inside of the trunk and getting it completely cleaned up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some 100 grit sandpaper. I'm going to sand down the entire thing. That goes to the inside of the lid too. And then I'm going to go to about 150 grit sandpaper, then 180, and then I'll finish sanding with 220. If you progressively use different sizes of sandpaper, it'll get smoother and remove all the visible scratches and everything within inside the trunk. If you don't know, sandpaper is measured in grits. So let's say you're using 100 grit sandpaper. That means that in every square inch, a 1 by 1 box on that sandpaper will be 100 grits. So as compared to, say, 600 grit sandpaper, there'll be 600 pieces of grit within a square inch. Meaning that because there's more grit, it has to be finer in order to fit more within that square inch. And whenever you're sanding, you can get a sanding block. If you have a random orbital sander, power sanders, whatever, that works fine. If you don't, you can do it all by hand. And what you'll do is you get your sandpaper, starting with your lowest grit, and just sand with the grain of the wood. You don't want to sand like this. You want to sand with the grain in order to get the best finish. If you sand against the grain, you'll just end up with a bunch of ugly scratches on the inside. So remember, progressively sand, 100 grit, 150, 180, 220. Sand with the grain till it's all cleaned out. You'll find that maybe there might be a little pieces of paper and whatnot left in there. If you have to, scrape them out. They're hard to sand because the paper tends to load up your sandpaper and you won't get a lot of actual removal. So if there's any little bits of papers you see where you're going to do sanding in the trunk, just take your scraper and just lightly scrape it out and keep sanding. Once you've finished sanding the inside of your trunk, you're pretty much done with the inside for now. If you plan to reline the inside of the trunk with paper or fabric or some other type of covering, it's not as important to sand all the way down to 220, but you're still going to want to sand it at least with one pass using 100 or 150 grit sandpaper just to get it clean, so whenever you install that fabric or that paper, you get a good bond and there isn't a bunch of dirt or dust or old glue residue that will impede the fabric or other lining material from adhering to the wood. And that's it for this video. In part 3, we'll be covering a lot of the exterior work on the trunk itself, and then we'll get into painting and reconditioning the wood and things like that later on in the series. Thank you.